Clare saved my life. My mother was from Clare, and I've loads of relatives down there. But when I was young, uh, we were flooded in Dublin in the Great Floods in 1952, I think. I was only a kid, and I had TB. I was supposed to die, all that kind of crap. And when I survived, I just survived in time to get myself strong enough to go back to school into a sudden polio epidemic. And we were in a tough part of Dublin, you know. My mother married a millionaire who gambled all the money away. And she was a very posh woman who had her own governess when she was young. And suddenly we were falling on hard times, which was quite funny. I had a great time, so I shouldn't laugh. Harder for her. But I lived with my aunts and the sort of, what, four women in one house. It was kind of mad. But I was sent down to County Clare to be safe from the polio epidemic. And of course, I got every disease known to man, playing with cows and pigs and geese and ducks and hens and everything. And hay from making the hay, I couldn't breathe. And then after about a month, well, never got. I mean, I haven't had a cold since 2004 when I came back from Russia after sitting 5 hours outside Moscow airport because there were bombings going on. And I put all that health, the immune system I have, down to animals of County Clare, for want of a better simplified explanation.
Were you an only child? It sounds as if you were.
Oh, I was, absolutely, yeah. My mother was a working woman. She had to go out and work, you know. She was in the fashion business, so she was a fashionista, you know.
So was there an artistic background running through your life there? It sounds like it to some degree.
I'll bring you back to my grandfather. Frank McNally in the Irish Times described my grandfather as the cartoon wing of the nationalist movement. He died in 1912 now, you know, but he ran a magazine called The Leprechaun, and he worked for New York Gaelic American, doing anti-British cartoons mostly. And he kind of did a lot of, what's the word for it? He countered a lot of Thomas Nast's ugliness, where he portrayed the apes, the Irish as apes. And there's a book written about my grandfather and his movement called Apes and Angels. And his cartoons kind of countered the English cartoons about us. And I don't know if you know Thomas Nast, founder of Condé Nast. He was the most virulent anti-Irish person you could imagine. He depicted us as apes, pure and simple, in his cartoons. And the stereotype of the Irish as apes comes from that. They were simian in appearance, you know. And my grandfather took a stand, and he worked for many magazines across the world, but really what he was doing, besides having fun with his work, was countering the stereotypical approach of cartoonists in England, like Tenniel, who illustrated Alice in Wonderland, among his better work, but he did a lot of vicious cartoons. One particular called The Irish Frankenstein, showing us as just like apish Frankenstein creatures. And my grandfather did one as a riposte called The English Frankenstein. So I come from a checkered background of lunatic people.
So in those early days, you had that background. I'm sure, obviously, the awareness of that part of your family. But were you actually?
Well, if you could imagine this, mother was a member of the League of Empire Loyalists, and we lived in a house with the most rabid Republicans. So it was like living in the middle of the Civil War, except nobody was killing each other. So I grew up with a profound view that encompasses the loyalists of Northern Ireland, who I've worked with on and off even during the war, and the Republicans and nationalists of Northern Ireland, who I've worked with even during the war. You know, I'm a pacifist.
When did the first drawing or painting or artistic piece come to you to tell you as a young person or otherwise, I want to be an artist all my life?
When I was in school, I was always drawing, and I was getting caught at it and sent to detention and made right lines and all this crap. And then one day the teacher walked over to what I was doing and said, "We've nothing to teach you. Do what you want." So they let me draw and illustrate my own story. I was making little books in my head. And then I was made editor of the school magazine called the Tally Ho. I went to Franciscan College in Gormiston, and I have nothing but admiration for the Franciscans. I'm still a Catholic. I refused to leave because of the pedos. And the Franciscans, you must remember, Father Leonard Boff, is still alive, thank God, were the ones who came up with the idea of liberation theology, which is spread right across Latin America. We now have not the best governments, but they're a hell of a lot better than the dictatorships, you know.
So you were encouraged, where in many other cases, young people are kind of stilted in their kind of artistic growth because people say you should paint it this way, you should do it that way, or don't do that. So you were
Well,
encouraged.
I've heard that all my life, but the great thing about being a stubborn redhead is that it's kind of like a challenge. If somebody tells me not to do something, I want to do it immediately. It's a reflex mechanism. I do so many different types of art that at the moment now I'm, what, 72, and I think I really should be focusing. So I might get back to Celtic art. I used to love all that so much, but it takes forever to do.
What are you going to do when you grow up? Is what you're asking yourself there at 72.
At 73, you think I'd be maturing, you know?
Well, the earliest days, yeah, the school days, and so important to be encouraged in that. Did you think that it would become? And I don't even like to use the word career because that to me means a kind of a very structured, very fanciful kind of notion when we look back at our own lives, because we think we're building a career, and in fact we're actually careering from this to the other.
No, I had no choice. My mother was a working woman. She couldn't support me, especially when I got older. So I had to find some way of supporting myself. And she used to take me in. She worked in the fashion industry. And she used to take me in to meet designers and artists and people like that. But then she had a couple of good contacts in the advertising industry. So she took me in to see how advertising sort of art direction worked and stuff like that. I hadn't a clue, to be honest. But before I left school, I managed to get a job in the worst advertising agency in history, and the smallest as well. I think there were four of us, and one big guy who paid us £2 a month, or a week. Sorry, £2 a week. Even then, that was starvation wages. But at least I learned very quickly, because the other two guys, two of them were professionals. Myself and the other guy were just, we hadn't a clue what end of this was up. When I was asked to do a layout for an advertising campaign, my first question to the guy was, "What's a layout?" You know? Hadn't a clue. But I managed to muddle my way through and bluff my way through. But I had a great advocate when I was in Franciscan College in Gormiston, Father Louis, who's still a friend of mine, actually. He's the head of the entire Franciscan order in Rome. I think he's the head of the Irish College there. And yeah, he's still a good guy, and they were all good guys. We got lucky. There were none of those sort of stuff you read about in the papers, priests.
Were you able to kind of practice your own art separately from that kind of agency work, or did one emerge after the other?
What happened was, when I was doing agency work, I was also doing these massive oil paintings and exhibiting. Some were exhibited, some were rejected. I did for the 1996, no, I'm going wrong here, 1966 exhibition for commemorating 1916 Rising. There was an exhibition in what's now the Hugh Lane Gallery, the Dublin Municipal Art Gallery. And one of my paintings, the very first oil painting I ever did in canvas, was actually exhibited there for that. So I was a kid. So I started off very ambitious, all downhill from there.
66, we've already kind of got a feeling that you've a background and an interest in the political world, the world of revolution, for sure. This is when you created the image of Che Guevara, I'm taking it.
Well, there's another whole story there. I'll try and keep it short. I met Che Guevara when I was in final year or fifth year in school. The priests wanted us to go on a pilgrimage to Rome, and being Franciscans, with our vow of poverty, they refused to allow our parents' pay. So everybody became equal. We all had to go and earn our own money and prove we earned our own money. So one of the priests got us a job, got myself and my friend Gilbert Brosnan, who lives up the hill from me still. We meet every year for the past pupils, but we see each other all the time. But myself and Gilbert were sent down as schoolboys to the Marine Hotel in Kilkee. And it was a revelation. Because, again, we hadn't a clue. We had no experience in anything. And I was going to be a barman. He was going to be a waiter. And the first night, I remember well, the first couple of nights, we slept in a barn on a mattress on straw with the cows farting below us. And it was extraordinary. I was used to that, but Gilbert wasn't, you know. I was used to cows, and I slept with cows, like I said. But this wasn't what we expected. So, long story cut short, I eventually persuaded the guy by threatening to ring my father, who was non-existent, you have to remember. I bluffed him. who I said was a trade union leader. So we got quarters in the hotel itself. And I became a barman. After about a month, I became pretty good, and I was getting good tips, and I learned to take the late night shift. Whenever we got drunk, and tipped handsomely. Late night shift being a lockup, so we didn't get out of there till 5 o'clock in the morning. And I was up one morning for mass, came back. It was a beautiful sunny day. This would be in August of 1961, and I was in the bar, and in walked Che Guevara and two of his companions. So I had a really interesting conversation with him. You see, I was brought up by the Franciscans, by my mother, by my aunts, all very political people, right? I knew about the Irish diaspora. As you probably learned yourself, Admiral Brown founded the Argentinian Navy. Simon Bolivar had an Irish general. Bernardo O'Higgins, who liberated Chile, and so on and so on. You know what I mean? So I knew my stuff, not all of it, but some of it. And when Che came up to the bar, he wanted to know, and his English was good, it was halting but good. He wanted to know what he should drink, so I suggested a whiskey. And you have to remember, this is heresy what I'm telling you, because I deal with his family, and El Comandante never drank. Well, he did when I was there. And he had a whiskey, and I suggested ginger ale or water, and he took a bit of water. And he was very polite and well-mannered, nice man. I was talking away to him. I can remember the conversation because, to me, this was one of my heroes. I knew exactly who he was. I had followed the Cuban Revolution avidly, and this a couple of years later. And we talked about the Irish diaspora, and he told me he was Irish. He didn't say Argentinian Irish or Cuban. I think he said, I'm Irish. And I was looking at him like the most unlikely Irishman I'd ever seen. I'd only ever met Irish Americans, Irish Australians, Irish Canadians. I'd never had any real idea that there was a huge Irish influx into Latin America, especially from the Midlands, And here was one of them. And he told me about the huge Irish diaspora in Argentina, which I, of course, should have known about, but didn't, They had their own newspaper, the Southern Cross. And his father was Ernesto Guevara Lynch. So he told me his grandmother was from Cork. Now, that story changed over the years because the papers changed the grandmother to County Galway, and she became Isabel Lynch, which is his true grandmother's name, but that was his great-great-grandmother. So there's a lot of stuff there. I don't want to get into it now, but he was pretty obviously enamored with Ireland, and he had been here before. Fast forward to 1965, and he arrived in Ireland again, and he was in the company of Arthur Egan of the Limerick Leader when he went missing for a night in the White House bar in Limerick, and came out with Commandante Sheehan Fergus's brother, not Carlos. And he had shamrock stuck in his red star on his cap, and a little worse for wear. But again, the Commandante did not drink. We know that for a fact. But go on. He was a very entertaining man.
That was your direct contact with him. When did you decide to put that onto some sort of canvas then?
I've always kept the original. I did 5 versions. The red and black one that you're referring to, the famous one, was the 3rd version I did. And I announced grandly in the evening press that I was making it copyright free for revolutionary purposes. And God, you've seen what happened since. There's huge cigarette companies in Europe using it. You couldn't make this stuff up. So I reclaimed the copyright in 2011, and I now own the copyright, and I've given all the rights in a legal document to Elia de Guevara, who I met. I spent 3 days with her down in Kilkee celebrating her father's visit there. And it belongs to the Cuban people in perpetuity. The problem, as I've faced with this image all my life, is that you can't give it away because nobody wants to try and put Pandora's box or put Pandora back in the box or the genie back in the bottle. It's well out now. And this is what prompted me. That really annoyed the crap out of me. My mother died of smoking, cancer. And I have a bag of these things. And I decided to fight against what I call the crass commercialization, I mean, this is a joke. Look, his hat even pops up. Where am I? There we are. I mean, don't even get me going. Unfortunately, I'm not a rich guy. I have no money at all. I'm always broke because I work a lot for nothing. And I don't sell my work. Though I should mention, George R. R. Martin has just bought an original. You know George R. R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones? He loves my work, I gather, and he's bought an original for his wife for Valentine's Day last week, which is fantastic, you know. But anyway, long story cut short, the Guevara image proliferates to the point of insanity, which I wanted it to because, you know, I don't want to go into the story of how he was murdered, because I've spoken to his murderer. And he was executed as a prisoner of war and told the guy to get on with it and bloody try and shoot straight, you know. And it's an emotive subject for me, but I'm still determined at this stage to see if I can put things, not put them right, but just maybe have all the money that these cigarette companies would owe in terms of royalties and get those to the Children's Hospital in Havana. I've been asked to use this so many times. Woody Allen's films have asked me to allow them to use it in a film they're doing at the moment, and like everything else with that image, I always insist that any fees go to the nearest children's hospital. Don't care where it is. So I don't take money for that image.
Let's move on from Che Guevara. That iconic image is that it almost I can say one that I certainly remember from being a young person, but also kind of spawned other ideas and other concepts of icons very much. So it was at the forefront of that kind of movement of pop art, as it were.
It was, and to be fair, you know, it's not like I've been left out of history. Professor Martin Kemp, who's the world's authority on imagery and the world's authority on Leonardo da Vinci, the only person that the Italian government allows to drill through a very famous painting at the moment to see if the Leonardo is underneath. And he's rediscovered La Bella Principessa and Salvatore Monday as Leonardo's. He came over here to meet me. I was curious to know why. It turned out that he was writing a book which has since been published called Iconic Images from Christ to Coke. And he has, in this book, delineated the 10 or 11 or 12, I can't remember, many greatest images in the history of art. And the Mona Lisa is number 5 and Che is number 6. So can't say I'm not recognised for what I did.
Let's move on in your artistic life. Then you were started in that kind of advertising agency. Where did things move for you afterwards?
Well, I stayed in advertising quite a while because I earned vast money. I managed to buy a house and educate my kids, or get them started anyway. And then I decided I would become an artist in my own right. Now, even in advertising, I was exhibiting in designer shows, in art shows, all kinds of stuff. I was always keeping my hand in. When I left advertising, unfortunately, the world economy crashed. We had what was known as the petrol crisis, when OPEC decided they were going to stop supplying the West with petrol, if you remember, and there were queues down the blocks. So long story short, I had to find another way of... No, that's too late. It would be 76. Yeah, 72. No, 72. It would be 73, 1973. And they pulled the plug out, you know, on petrol. So Europe had no petrol, so we all had to queue. But anyway, long story cut short, I got out of that by getting a publishing contract for a publisher, and I did the Book of Conquests and the Silver Arm through them. At the same time, my friend Philip Lynott, who I knew through a mutual friend because I played football all my life up to about 5 years ago, and my friend introduced me to Philip, who admired my work because I was working for a beat group at the time that included, like, we got support from people like Allen Ginsberg, the famous American poet from San Francisco, City Lights. And we were the only beat group outside of San Francisco, I discovered, from a San Francisco radio station which interviewed me. So why don't you move on? The group was called Tara Telephone. I was doing all the graphics. And Philip Lynott saw all these graphics and loved them. So he asked me to work with his band, Thin Lizzy. Well, I was with his grandkids last week, his daughter and his grandkids, and I had a laugh. Philip Lynott, for those of you who don't know, was probably the first, along with Jimi Hendrix, the very first black man ever to front a white band internationally. In Ireland, nobody gives a shit about that. He was just an Irishman who happened to be black. But I met him through a mutual friend, and we always, like, he was obviously black with a big bush of hair on him. I was white, ginger, freckly, like pale white, with red hair down to my waist. but we were the same kind of height and disposition. And when we got to know each other, we realised we had a lot in common. His father legged it, and his mother had to leave Philip in the care of her mother, Philip's grandmother. And I grew up in a house full of women with my grandmother and 3 aunts. So once we kind of copped on, we were very similar life stories. We got on like a house on fire. He was my best friend for a long period. And people talk about the drugs that killed him. Philip didn't die of drugs. Drugs were a contributing factor. He died of overwork and a broken heart. He could not perform non-stop at the level he wanted to perform, day in, day out. With 35, as he said to me himself in one of his last conversations before he died, with 35 families, not people, 35 families, depending on him to get up in the morning, do rehearsals, and then perform at night. And there were days when he couldn't do it. So what do? You take drugs. So before anybody, I'm not saying you would, but before people jump up and down about drugs, they say, what the hell else would you expect them to do? Eat cornflakes to get that level of performance? If you look at Lance Armstrong and people like that, of course we condemn, but they've devoted their lives to something. And when it wasn't getting them where they wanted, they took drugs. Somebody said to me, because I think I'm a very honest person, Niall Stokes, one of the most honest people in history, because I played football for years, said to me, Jim, because I gave up football when I got cancer, 65, 66, 67, 66, 67, yeah. And I was playing at a high level of football for my age, very high level actually. And Niall said to me, Jim, if you could have extended your playing career by 5 years by taking performance-enhancing drugs, would you? And I didn't have to think. I said, I'd dig my granny up and grind her bones and mix them with, Eye of Newt and Tail of John. If I thought I'd get 5 more years of football. So these moral dilemmas are easy to sort of, point fingers about. But Philip was one of the best people I've ever met. He was a beautiful man. And I'm lucky to know his kids and hang out with them. His daughter Kathleen, he wrote a song for Kathleen, I don't know if you know that, beautiful song about a beautiful art. Like himself, very black, where his other daughter is very white. So it's quite funny. And myself and Kathleen and her went to date together last week on the beach where Philip used to live down the road beside me, It was beautiful. And we lived. The other thing is, Philip, in those days, being a black man in Ireland, never got any racial crap. He told me, what did they say? He said it was like being black in Ireland back then, and there was only 4 black people that I knew in the whole bloody city of 500,000 people. And I knew every one of them except for one guy who I met later on, but that's another story. People said to him, when he was asked on television by Che Guevara, one of our great commentators once, what's it like being black in Ireland? And he said, it was like having cauliflower ears. Everybody looked at you, but nobody said anything.
How was it working on the artwork for those various albums? How much fun was that?
It was wonderful, and not just wonderful, it was incredibly lucrative. It saved my family, saved my kids, meant I could send them to a good school, get them educated, all that sort of stuff. That's what it's all about, you know what I mean? The money is never to go out and party, the money's to bloody survive, And the Thin Lizzy money was bloody superb at the time,
Let's move on in your artistic life then. You were starting in that kind of advertising agency. Where did things move for you afterwards?
Thin Lizzy, you might say, gave me the financial stability to take on projects like writing, researching, and painting a book like the Book of Conquest or the Silver Round, the ones that George Martin admires, that I pulled from publication 30 years ago and refused to have them published since, because somebody read them. And I suppose they, in 2 ways, 2 strands, were working for me. The Thin Lizzy and the rock music thing, because that was vast. That got me more attention than you could imagine. It was the equivalent of viral, and the Celtic work. So I kind of let the shade go. I was doing a lot of political work for the Workers' Party at that time, book covers, all kinds of stuff. But then the war started up north, and I thought, I'm not doing anything, getting involved in any of that,
Let's look at that kind of Celtic work, very much based on the ancient stories of Ireland. Had you known them from youth, or came to them later in life?
I'd known them from youth, but not the ones you think of. I'd known the obvious ones, Finn McCool, Cú Chulainn, Taun, but we weren't taught any of this in school, you have to remember. There's a huge inferiority complex in this country, and still is, towards our past. Our past, I mean, the present government, and I don't want to criticise them because they're all the same, they see Ireland's culture as something to mine rather than fund, you know? And they take, and give very little back. They've cut all arts funding down to the bone. And yet, when we had this big cultural conference at Farmley, where all the millionaires Irish from all over the world, including America, came, and they came to the conclusion that Ireland should be pushing its culture, that the culture was what drew people to Ireland as well as the scenery. So you'd think to be a huge, amount of money invested in the arts. No, quite the opposite. They just cut it back to zero virtually. So long story cut short, when I was young, I knew the basic legends of Ireland, the children of Lear, all that sort of stuff. But there was a paragraph about these mysterious races who came to Ireland, 5 invasions of Ireland. And they were all mentioned in a book called Leabhar Gabhála, the book of the taking, the book of conquests. And I was very curious about these people because when I was in Clare, I heard all about the Tuatha Danann and the fairy tales and the Pishogues and all the rest of it. And the woman I lived with was a very mystical woman, very ordinary woman, uneducated. My aunt related to my mother. And she was full of folklore, full of beliefs, full of all kinds of stuff. The fairies, you name it. And I kind of got into that in a big way, and I understood what she was going on about. There was a mystical element to our existence in places like that, where you were closely connected to the earth, And of course, I was a Catholic, and I believed in the spiritual side of life, you might say, from a very early age, which I still do. And in between them all, I decided to do something about it. So I started reading in libraries. And then I got a copy of Keating's History of Ireland, written in 1670, I think, or 1720, by Father Geoffrey Keating. And it was astonishing. It had all the annals transcribed into English, many of them including books like Cin Droma Sneachta, the great book of the White Cow, lost forever. But he has excerpts from it because it existed in his day. All the great lost books, the Taun, it was a lost book, was reconstituted by bards and sages who got together to try and force everybody to tell their account of the Taun and then bring it all together in one volume. So we're lucky to have anything. A lot of these books were destroyed, some deliberately by the English, who used Larna Huda, we know, or not Larna Huda, Cin Droma Sneachta, the big book, the great book of the White Cow, that has all these original annals. A lot of these pages have been discovered used as bindings for volumes of other books because they were vellum. And not bindings on the cover, not the leather, but underneath the leather, So we've lost a huge amount, but we're lucky we have so much. And we have an oral tradition as well that's very healthy and still exists, and there are some great storytellers out there. But I decided I was going to arbitrarily bring it all back. So I started writing my books, and I got a publisher in England and America, and did a book called The Book of Conquest, telling the story of the very first races who came to Ireland. We're not a single homogenous Neolithic race. We're 5 different races. And what's extraordinary is that no one will accept that the indigenous inhabitants of this island were from North Africa, and that all us red-haired guys and freckly guys came later. So you're in a minefield already. We know now, for instance, that Ireland was inhabited during the Ice Age, right? We know now from caves and recent discoveries that people ate bears, Now, it's a long time since bears were around Ireland. We're talking about 12, 15,000 years ago. So what were they doing here? Maybe they were like Eskimos living here. But we also know that as the ice retreated, that peoples from North Africa, I'm talking about, Tangier, below Spain, across the Tuaregs, the Rips, the Raps, the Caballele, they're the people who contributed so much to our culture that we ignore. Because the word shamrock, for instance, is an Arab word. It's not a Celtic word. It's not an Irish word. It means a trefoil plant, 3 leaves, 1 stem. And we know where that got us with St. Patrick. So a lot of the music you could play Arab music from that North Africa, not Middle East, North Africa, and it's similar to Irish music. So we have a huge debt to those people. And then redheads like myself come along, and we're after traversing across Europe from the Middle East, from Mesopotamia, and we are now kind of the real Irish, thanks to Maureen O'Hara and people like that. So I love all this racial stuff because there's so many different types of people. We have the Basques and the Spanish influence on the south of Ireland. We have the Scots and the Vikings and all up from the north down to the coast of Dublin here, where we still have the Viking family that ruled Dublin back in the day, still up in their castle up in Howth of St. Lawrence's now. Their knight's effigy are just down at the church in Howth, the old ruined church. And I photographed the daughter of the living heir. So we have a continuity of history here. And I'm just fascinated with genetics. My cousin is one of the top genetics in the country in Trinity College. So now we're researching together the Neanderthal gene, which is what redheads really are descended from. We have more Neanderthal gene than anybody in history. And its preponderance exists between Ireland and Scotland, and then Iraq and Israel, with some in South Ossetia and Russia spreading right over towards China. So it's an interesting gene, and we regard it as the Celtic gene, even though we're not really Celts, you know. Anyway, I'm going on about stuff. You can edit all this stuff out.
These are the best parts, Jim. These are the parts that we leave in. Uh, tell me more about how you see your work. I'll give you a couple of critiques. Critique's too strong a word here. What people see in your art, they see obviously the history, that love of that ancient Ireland, the symbolism and the rest, the stories. One person in particular said to me recently, I always feel the sensuality in the work of Jim Fitzpatrick. That's something that's pretty obvious.
The Irish were a very sensual people before Victorian times. We can blame the English for a lot, but we can certainly blame them for that. If you read Brian Merriman's Kurt on Man Eater, it's bloody raucous and wild. It's like Baudelaire or somebody. It's mad. And that was written, 3 centuries ago? That typifies what I would regard as the Irish race, the Irish approach to life. And, it's all their drinks were merry and all their songs were sad stuff, but it's true. And that was really killed off by the English, who had to destroy the tribal chieftain system. And I suppose if you fast forward up to the time of the founding of Maynooth, they realized they couldn't do it on their own. So they enlisted the church. And I don't criticize the church, because the church kept our civilization alive. I know my history. And they decided that they would establish the Catholic Church, like they established the Anglican and the other churches, by making them almost part of the state. And they brought in a kind of Puritan Victorianism, a respectability, and that's the key word, respectable, that made ordinary Irish people feel less than pure, less than honourable, less than moral, and they crushed all these wilder sides of our psyche very deliberately by using religion. And every churchman didn't do it. Many, many churchmen fought against it, and many of them wrote against it, and many of them actually paid the price because they didn't get promoted. And we're very lucky that we have anything left at all of our civilization, of our way of life. Conor O'Brien described Irish history as a series of attempted holocausts. And that about sums it up. We know we had at least 3, and there's probably a 4th in 1740, and the biggest famine in our history happened, not the one in 1840. And we've survived all this, just like the Scots have survived the Highland clearances. But we're lucky that we have our own culture and our civilization that's apart from Britain, apart from Europe. And what I try to do, I suppose, in this idealistic way we all think when we're young, and I'm still idealistic, is that I could show to Irish people the richness of a heritage that they didn't know about. I'm talking about the 5 early invasions of Ireland and who these people were and what they brought with them to this country. And it was a way of life and a way of living. Now, it's not exactly the way we'd like to live today, going around headhunting our enemies, but it was a wonderful tribal existence. And our annals and the book of Invasion was described by Jacob Stahl, the great literary genius of the last century, as the earliest voice of European civilization. And even Teddy Roosevelt was a huge admirer of Irish history and myth and wrote a book about Irish myths and legends, illustrated by that great American illustrator who did Queen Maeve and Cuchulainn, Frank Leyendecker. That was in around the 1910s, around 1910, just before the First World War. So before that, we had Macpherson's Forgery of Ossian, which meant Napoleon got seduced by the whole Celtic myth of Ireland and the purity of the Irish race, and this great painting by the great David himself, who painted Napoleon rearing on the horse, of the Irish and Ossian. So much so that Napoleon decided he would free Ireland and sent over his fleet that perished at Bantry Bay. But culture is not just a word that relates to the arts. Culture is what identifies a tribal society or a settled society, whatever you want to call it. And to me, it's what separates us from everybody else. And if you go back to 1916, writers, teachers, poets, playwrights, artists, especially the women as well, they were all the people who were imbued with this idea. Pearse especially. Pearse was the dreamer, Connolly was the pragmatist. Yet they worked together, two total polar opposites. And they wrote a constitution. First 3 words in the constitution were radical. Nobody understands now how radical they were. Irish men and Irish women. The mere fact that women were mentioned as equals, and then it goes on to say in the constitution that women are equal. Everybody is equal. It's earth-shattering.
That richness that you imbue and involve and engage with has been engaged at different periods through Irish history, as you're recording there. This is not a political discussion. You already allude to your feelings in the politics of the day and the nature of things.
To be fair, I'm great friends with Gerry Adams now, and I've met Martin McGuinness and the guys as well. I admired them hugely for taking us away and out of that war. It was a hideous war. There's no point in getting into it. It was a hideous war. And I think anybody, and bearing in mind that some of these people are very dangerous, anybody like McGuinness or Gerry Adams, who put their head above the parapet to give us peace, along with David Irvine of the UDA, and of course, unfortunately, the war criminal Tony Blair and Bill Clinton. But these people, and Bertie Ahern, disgraced now, but these people are the people who gave us peace. And I respect them for that. Whatever other faults they have, I'm not their judge. But we live in a society today in Ireland, which I regard as the sort of society I dreamt of living in. All we need now, and you won't agree with me on this, I believe, are full women's rights. And I believe once that happens, we have gay rights, we have rights for everybody now. Travellers are going to be recognised, I think, fairly soon as a distinct ethnic group. And we have a multicultural Ireland. It's everything I've dreamt of. We are a multicultural race from bloody thousands of years ago. We're not going to be overflown with an influx of refugees and all this propaganda stuff to go on. One of my best friends down the road is a Palestinian freedom fighter, very famous one, in exile here in Ireland, you know. He's one of the most popular people on Howth. Everybody knows him. We assimilate very easily. We take people in very easily. We're taking in, I think, 400 refugees from Syria in the next couple of weeks or so. We're taking in 4,000 altogether, which is still not enough. These are wonderful people. But we're a big race. We've plenty of room. There's a small island. But they bring richness into our lives, just like the previous invaders did, whether they be Vikings, whether they be British. The British, unfortunately, decided they were going to massacre us, but that's another story. They did leave some good things for us, including the rule of law. But if you look at the modern Ireland, it's the modern Ireland I dreamt of living in. I just feel it could progress a little bit further. And we're also looking at an economy in this country that's booming at the moment again. But bearing in mind that we were forced by the European Union to collect 62 billion to pay off the gambling debts of the Deutsche Bank and all these other bankers, you know, and we've been literally looted in a way that only Cromwell would have dreamt of.
We began hearing the story of Che Guevara and how you wanted that to distribute and to contribute to some form of revolution, some form of change. Your art in general, is that something that you think you have a responsibility to do in your art? Is it something that you've been able to do to influence change, do you think?
Oh, it is. I mean, behind me there, hold on so you can see it, is James Connolly. That's a print I did for Reclaim 1916. It was, I gave it away to Reclaim to raise money for a major kind of counter revolutionary, counter government demonstration, march, celebration, whatever you want to call it, that was very successful. The people involved were now trying to save Moore Street. The High Court have ruled that Moore Street is a battlefield and should be preserved. And would you believe that the government and the developer are taking a case against us to the Supreme Court so they can destroy a historic 1916 battlefield? You couldn't make this stuff up. So that's the politics of that. The one below me is Countess Markovitz, one of my heroes. I don't know if you can see her there. What I did was I got the photograph of Markovitz, and in the photograph, you know the history of it. It's well after the Rising, and she gave all her money to the poor of Dublin. She literally ended up broke, and by the time she dressed up to reenact the position she was taking in the Stephen's Green battle, and then in the College of Surgeons with Michael Mallon, she was pretty wrecked looking. So I went back onto the net, which is wonderful, and I researched and I realized there was a painting of her by a Polish artist from when she was younger. So I dug that out. It took a while, and I used a face from her youth and the position of the iconic photographs that were taken at the time, and juxtaposed the two and gave her youth back. So she looks what she would have looked like in 1916. Well, I know it's an Irish-American audience, and I know how these politics work. On that poster you see there, I put in a little badge on her epaulette, or on her pocket there, and it says repeal the 8th. So I believe that's the last hurdle we have for women to be equal.
And I know you use a variety of styles and a variety of skills. Which was the one that came to you first, or which one did you focus on first? Which technique, as it were?
Well, I'm self-taught, so everything I do is kind of experimental. And the technique, really, to be honest, it depends on my humor. I'm not interested in doing the same thing every day. I'll give you a simple example of an artist I admire. No, I'm not knocking him. Scully, probably one of the greatest artists in the world at the moment, who I know, who paints the same stripes over and over again in different colors and different tones and different moods, a bit like Mark Rothko doing his panels of, graduated color. And I'm just someone who wakes up and whatever I feel like I do. I have 2 Celtic works on the go at the moment, 3 actually, and when I'm in the humor for doing them, I'll keep at them for a whole week or so, and then I get bored, and I switch on to something. I've just finished a drawing of one of my best friends, a female. Yeah, it just depends on the humor I'm in, you know. The creator of Game of Thrones is George R.R. Martin, and he just brought one of my originals and expressed his admiration for my work and books, which is kind of interesting because my books came out before Game of Thrones, and I was the one who pulled them from the publisher because the publisher ran off tens of thousands of copies in Singapore without telling me. And that put me off publishing. Now I'm thinking, George R.R. Martin thinks I'm okay. I must be okay. It's almost like you get approval from someone. You think, maybe I'll get back to writing for a while. So now I'm going through all my old manuscripts, which I still have, and I'm editing them, because I did 2 books of a trilogy, and the third one I've half written. And I also translated the Táin Cúil, 3/4 of it. It took me 5 years. And I'm a good translator. I can read Latin. I could speak Latin. Can't now, but I could. And I can read Middle Irish, Ancient Irish, any kind of stuff. And I love all that kind of work, but it's totally time consuming, and it's a great way of going broke. So I'm sticking to my New Year's resolution, which is to do 1 work a week and put it up on Instagram and Facebook and all. And now I'm thinking, get back to writing and finish the third volume, even maybe the town. I don't know how long I've got, who knows?
The town, most recent people will know the kind of the work of Louis de Briquet on the 1970-71 version of that. So what you're talking about is doing another graphic novel?
No,
is that what you're
I'm
looking
too
to do?
old for that now. The time has passed. What I have is a superb translation, and I would love to see that translation published. When I say I'd love to see it published, I can publish myself. I published my last couple of books. It's just something I kind of feel, well, do you go to your grave with a ton 3/4 done, or you go to the grave when it's finished? I know which option I'd like. But I don't know if I had the money and the time, of course I'd illustrate it, but it takes, like, I live month to month, I've never been rich. I've kept all my work. I offered to the Irish state, what, 3 times, 4 times perhaps, free. I'm not even looking for a tax break, which I'm entitled to. George R.R. Martin, to give him his correct name, bought is one I offered free, and he paid a vast amount of money for it. So they are worth something, but the state doesn't seem to think so. But there you go.
What about borrowing of the technology of the time and sharing or allowing other, I don't know, do they call them artists, other graphic illustrators to continue your work in an animation sense? That's how a lot of the big work is done by others, or by computer, heaven forbid.
I was asked give the rights to one of my books to an American animator many years ago, but I told him the truth, which is that I study these things. My son is an expert. He worked in Spielberg's. He was one of the founding members, along with he wasn't head. He had his own department in DreamWorks, and he would now tell me the time is right now. They can do the kind of animation that's needed to do my work. Because there's 2 choices. I love, for instance, a film like Mulan, the Disney film. It's one of my favorites. The artist is a Filipino artist called Alex Nino, who's a wonderful artist. And it was all based on his work. I'd love somebody to come up and do something like that. I could do it about the money. It will happen. But my main priority at the moment is to maybe just get this 3rd book finished. Maybe just finish the Tawn as a literary work, as opposed to the sort of things I said before sort of took a turn for the worse. Send them to a good school, get them educated, all that sort of stuff. That's what it's all about, you know what I mean? The money is never to go out and party. The money's to bloody survive, And the Thin Lizzy money was bloody superb.
Something that we mentioned before was it and the comments come from elsewhere, the sensuality of the work that you did earlier and continue to do. You love painting women, you love drawing women. That continues.
Sure. Oh, I'll show you the latest one. I've just finished with my best friend who I'm seeing tomorrow. She's home. Portrait. I don't know if you can see it there. It's hard to see on Skype. Hang on. Yeah.
What style have you used in that? What type of?
None at all. It's just pencil, and I don't think of styles. And I understand why you're asking me, because people always ask me why do you use styles. That's just the way I felt when I was doing it. I had a nice sheet of watercolor paper. I have a book of watercolor paper, and I took out a page, and I thought, I wonder what I'd do with that. So I put it on a light box and started working from a photograph I'd taken of my friend Audrey. And then I thought, this is interesting, and just started painting. I painted a wash over it, and then started drawing. And literally, that's it. No secret, no magic, just work, keeping your head down,
Well, let's ask the question that I suppose lots of people who, from my point of view, from other people who want to get to the definition of where it comes from. Have you ever gone deeply into where you think the inspiration comes from? Do you have a higher power, or is it just sitting down in front of something and letting it happen.
I think Jung called it the racial subconscious. Carl Jung, the philosopher and psychologist, who was a peer of Freud. And I believe that there's something like a well of consciousness within you, especially for an artist, because I'm self-taught. I never went to art college. My grandfather was an artist. My father was a very poor artist, but a very fine photographer. My grandfather was a huge artist. He worked for the New York Gaelic American, places like that. He died in 1912. And, sorry, we've company. Hello. And I've always wanted to be an artist. I had no father, so I didn't inherit from my father. He didn't tell me how to do a damn thing. My mother told me how to clean brushes. That was about the height of her artistic influence, because, no, she encouraged me, don't get me wrong. Wasn't an artist herself.
Well, do you believe in a higher power outside of yourself?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I'm, believe it or not, I'm a Roman Catholic. I work with different armed groups in Syria who are fighting ISIS. Unfortunately, they're fighting groups that are trained by America, but that's going to stop, I gather, from what I heard in the news today. My favourite politician in America, by the way, I'd like to give her a mention, is Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who is bringing in a bill called the Stop Arming Terrorists Bill, to stop America arming Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and Jabhat al-Sham and the Zenki beheaders and all these people who have been trained by America. Thank God that'll stop, you know. But anyway, that's politics. We'll keep off it. So I'm an Irish Catholic, is what I'm trying to say, and I'm a militant Irish Catholic.
Yeah, we're certainly hearing that. That's for sure. You told us in the previous time about what you're going to do next. What you say you like to hold on a second here, Jim. I'll just let this machine go past here. It's a noisy one.
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
You mentioned about a project a day. You've shown us your project from yesterday. What's the next project?
Oh no, it's a project a week.
Project.
Holy God! Don't send me to an early grave. I'm supposed to be slowing down at my age. No, around 1994, I think I hit the 52 mark, 52 works, and I thought, God has given me back my life. I had cancer. I was stage 3. I should have been dead. I had it for 8 years. I had chemo, radio, the works. I've not in a bag. Everything is back working. It's brilliant. I cycle all the time. Nearly killed myself there this time last year on the bike, but that's beside the point. I'm still here. And I kind of feel I'd love one last shot at doing something that I did when I was young. You know what I mean? Just going over the top. Then I can relax again, I suppose. But I'm never going to be able to relax.
You always like a challenge in front of you.
No, I'm driven. I really get up every morning. I want to do something bloody decent with my life. You know what I mean? And no, if you could say to all the people in San Francisco, as I love San Francisco, I'll give you a laugh. The biggest influence on my life, apart from people like Beardsley and Muka, were San Francisco poster artists of the 60s, psychedelic poster artists. And I became friends with many of them, including the late Rick Griffin, one of the greatest Irish as well, and into Irish mythology. Anybody who knows anything about psychedelic art will know who Rick Griffin is. Stanley Mouse is still alive. Hi, Stanley. He lives in San Francisco. And I know many of that group, Victor Moscoso, Anton Kelly is dead now, God rest him. And they were the great artists who influenced me. So I just want to say, Francisco, thank you, Callum.
And hopefully you'll come and visit us sometime in the near future.
I would love I won the IBAN last year and I couldn't go. I sent him instead of me. Said I'd try and go this year, you know. But I'm still, it's not like I'm recovering from cancer. I've recovered. Got the all year before Christmas. But I kind of feel God gave me my life back. I really should get on with this now. I've had a great time. I've enjoyed every minute of my life. But I think it's time to get back to work.